At first, it looked like just another ordinary moment at the train station. Strangers passing by, footsteps echoing, lives intersecting for a heartbeat, then moving on. But sometimes, in the middle of all that noise, a single silent gesture can change everything. A paralyzed boy named Marlon sat in his wheelchair, unable to walk, unable to speak clearly, but his eyes were screaming. And the only person who noticed was a man the world had written off as a monster. Michael Herman. Michael wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero. He was a mafia boss with a reputation that made grown men flinch, saw what no one else did, a child's desperate plea for help. What happened next proved that redemption doesn't ask for permission, and sometimes heroes have tattoos, scars, and blood on their hands. Stay till the end, because what unfolds will restore your faith in humanity. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. It means the world to see how far these stories reach. The afternoon rush at the central station was in full motion. Footsteps echoed across polished marble floors, the hum of voices blending into a steady, relentless rhythm. Announcements crackled overhead, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and diesel fuel. Michael Herman stood near a row of benches, dressed entirely in black, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. His presence cut through the crowd like a blade. People instinctively gave him space, their eyes darting away as they passed. They didn't need to know his name to recognize danger. Michael wasn't here on business. Not today. He was waiting for a train. His train. The one that would take him away from this city, maybe for good. He had been thinking about it for weeks now. Retirement. Stepping back from the life, from the violence, from the empire he'd built on fear and blood. He was tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of the weight of names he couldn't forget, faces he'd erased. But old habits die hard. Even standing still, his eyes scanned the terminal, watching, reading, calculating. It was instinct now. Muscle memory carved into him by years of survival. And that's when he saw the boy. Marlon Brown sat in a wheelchair near the edge of the crowd, just outside the flow of travelers. He was small, painfully thin, with pale skin and light brown hair that fell across his forehead. His legs were still beneath a thin blanket. His body was motionless from the waist down. But his eyes were sharp, alert. Scanning the crowd with the precision of someone far older than 6 years old. Michael's gaze lingered. Something about the boy felt wrong. Not dangerous, not threatening, just wrong. Then he saw it. The boy's hand moved, slowly, deliberately, tap, tap. His small finger struck the armrest of his wheelchair twice. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. 3 more taps. Faster this time. His trembling hand lifted slightly, then fell back against the armrest. Michael's jaw tightened. He knew patterns. He'd spent his entire life reading them, codes, signals, gestures exchanged in rooms where words could get you killed. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. The boy's eyes shifted. They locked onto something, or someone, across the terminal. Michael followed his gaze. A woman, mid-30s, dark coat, expressionless face. She was walking briskly through the crowd, one hand gripping the shoulder of a young boy, the other pulling a small girl by the wrist. Behind her, a third child, A boy no older than 8 trailed a step behind, his eyes cast downward. To anyone else, she looked like a tired mother herding her children through a busy station. But Michael had seen fear before. He knew what it looked like when someone was being controlled. The children's steps were too stiff, too rehearsed. The little girl glanced back once, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to scream but couldn't. Michael's pulse quickened. He looked back at the boy in the wheelchair. Marlon's hand tapped again. Faster now, more urgent. Tap, 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 tap. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Just a silent plea. Michael straightened. His instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive in back alleys and boardrooms, were screaming now. Something was very, very wrong. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the woman and her children. The crowd moved around him like water around stone. People hurried past, oblivious, laughing, texting, living their ordinary lives. But Michael Herman wasn't ordinary, and neither was this moment. He glanced back at Marlon one more time. The boy's eyes met his, wide, desperate, filled with a terror too deep for words. Michael exhaled slowly, his hand instinctively brushing the inside of his jacket where a blade usually rested. He'd left it behind today. He wasn't supposed to need it anymore. But now, standing in the middle of that crowded terminal, watching a paralyzed boy silently scream for help, Michael realized something. He wasn't done yet. The woman disappeared into the thickening crowd near the departure gates. Michael's eyes tracked her movement, his mind already calculating angles, exits, blind spots. He had worked in shadows long enough to know when someone was running, and she was running. He didn't know it yet, but in the middle of that ordinary afternoon rush, a silent cry for help was about to unravel a nightmare, one that only a man like Michael Herman, dangerous, calculating, and haunted by his past, could stop. Michael moved through the crowd like a shadow. His eyes locked on the woman in the dark coat. She was 30 meters ahead now, weaving between clusters of travelers with practiced efficiency. Not rushed, not panicked, just purposeful. The kind of movement that came from repetition. He studied her posture as he followed. Her shoulders were rigid, her head never turning fully to look back. One hand remained clamped on the young boy's shoulder, not guiding him, but gripping him. The other pulled the little girl forward by her wrist, not her hand. Small details, the kind most people wouldn't notice. But Michael Herman had spent 20 years reading people for signs of deception, fear, and control. And this woman? She was performing. The children moved like marionettes. Their steps were measured, rehearsed, lacking the natural chaos of kids their age. The oldest boy, the one trailing behind, kept his head down, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. His shoulders were hunched inward, as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. The little girl stumbled slightly, and the woman yanked her upright without breaking stride. No scolding, no reassurance, just a cold, mechanical correction. Michael's jaw clenched. He'd seen this before. Different cities, different faces, same patterns. This wasn't a family. This was a transaction in progress. The woman slowed near a row of departure gates, her eyes scanning the digital boards overhead. Michael hung back, positioning himself behind a support column. He watched as she pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then glanced toward the far end of the terminal. She was waiting for someone. Michael's mind raced. The taps, the boy's signal. It wasn't random. It was a code, a warning, the kind of thing you learned when words could get you killed, or when you physically couldn't speak them. He turned and moved back through the crowd, retracing his steps toward the wheelchair. Marlin was exactly where Michael had left him, still as stone except for his trembling hands. His eyes tracked Michael's approach, wide and glassy with fear. The boy's chest rose and fell in short, rapid breaths. Michael crouched down in front of the wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level. Up close, he could see the bruises, faint, yellowed marks along Marlin's wrists, old injuries poorly healed. His fingers were bent at odd angles, as if they'd been broken and never set properly. "Kid," Michael said quietly, his voice low enough that only Marlin could hear. "Who is she?" Marlin's lips parted. His mouth moved, struggling to form words. His breath came out in stuttered bursts, his vocal cords fighting against damage Michael couldn't see but could easily imagine. "Not..." Marlin's voice cracked, barely audible above the noise of the terminal. His eyes filled with tears. "Not... mother..." 2 words. That's all it took. Michael's instincts ignited like a match struck in the dark. Everything clicked into place. The rehearsed movements, the children's terror, the woman's cold efficiency. This wasn't a mother traveling with her kids. This was a handler moving product. "How do you know?" Michael whispered, his tattooed hand resting gently on the armrest of the wheelchair. Marlin's hand moved again. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. The same pattern as before. Then his trembling finger pointed toward his own chest, then toward the woman's direction. Michael understood. The boy had been taken before. He recognized her. "Did she do this to you?" Michael asked, his voice harder now, edged with something dangerous. Marlin nodded, just once. A tear slipped down his cheek. Michael's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He'd done terrible things in his life, things that kept him awake at night, staring at ceilings in empty rooms. He'd hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on the backs of fear and violence. But this was different. He looked back toward the departure gates. The woman was still there, still waiting, still gripping those children like cargo. Michael stood slowly, his mind already shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had kept him alive for 2 decades. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero. But he was a predator. And right now, he was staring at another predator who thought she was safe in the open. She wasn't. "Stay here," Michael said quietly to Marlin. "Don't move. Don't signal anyone else. Understand?" Marlin nodded again, his wide eyes locked on Michael's face. Michael turned and slipped his phone from his pocket. He typed a quick message to Victor, his second in command. "Eyes on terminal. Woman, dark coat, 3 kids. Track but don't engage. I'll handle it." The reply came in seconds. "Copy. 2 minutes out." Michael pocketed the phone and moved back into the crowd, his eyes finding the woman again. She was on the move now, heading toward a side corridor that led to the lower platform levels. The children struggled to keep pace. Michael followed at a distance, his footsteps silent despite his size. His mind ran through scenarios, exits, potential witnesses. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't even about justice. This was about stopping something wrong before it disappeared into the machinery of the underworld, a world he knew better than anyone. The woman glanced over her shoulder once, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Michael didn't flinch. He simply turned his head, pretending to read a departure board, his body language casual. When he looked back, she had quickened her pace. She knew someone was watching. Michael's pulse remained steady, his breathing calm. This was familiar ground. the hunt, the stalk, the moment before everything exploded. He just had to wait for the right opening. And in this business, openings always came. Michael moved through the terminal with the patience of a hunter who had learned long ago that rushing got you killed. He kept his distance, 20 meters, sometimes 30, using the natural flow of travelers as cover. A businessman with a briefcase, a family pulling suitcases, a group of tourists studying a map. He blended into the chaos, just another face in the crowd. But his eyes never left her. The woman in the dark coat had picked up her pace, but not enough to draw attention. She was too experienced for that. Her movements were calculated, efficient, designed to look ordinary while covering ground quickly. The children struggled to match her stride, their small legs working double time to keep up. Michael's jaw tightened as he watched the oldest boy stumble slightly. The woman's hand shot out, gripping his arm hard enough that the boy's face contorted in silent pain. She yanked him upright without slowing down, without a word. Then she released him and kept walking. No comfort, no concern, just control. They descended a wide staircase toward the lower platform levels, the fluorescent lights harsher down here, the air thicker with the smell of diesel and metal. Fewer people, longer sightlines. Michael held back, letting the distance between them grow. Down here, he was more exposed. One wrong move and she'd bolt. Or worse, she'd signal whoever else was involved. Because Michael was certain now, she wasn't working alone. The woman slowed near a row of metal benches, her eyes scanning the corridor ahead. The children clustered around her, obedient and silent. She checked her phone again, her thumb moving rapidly across the screen. Then she looked up, her gaze settling on something, or someone, across the lower terminal. Michael followed her line of sight. A man in a gray hoodie stood near a vending machine, his back to the wall. His hands in his pockets. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a thin frame and restless eyes that never stopped moving. He didn't look at the woman directly. Instead, he glanced at her once, then looked away. His attention seemingly focused on the vending machine's display. But Michael caught the exchange. The woman's hand moved, subtle, deliberate. 3 fingers extended briefly against her thigh, then curled back into a fist. A pause, then 2 fingers, another pause. Her hand moved to brush her hair back, but the gesture was mechanical, rehearsed. The man in the gray hoodie responded without looking at her. He scratched the side of his neck, once, twice, then adjusted his hood. His hand dropped to his side, and his index finger tapped against his leg. 1, 2, 3. Code. Michael had seen it 1,000 times in back rooms and warehouses, in deals conducted in silence where words were liabilities. This was a confirmation, a status update. Everything's on schedule. His pulse quickened, but his face remained impassive. He moved to a nearby column, pretending to check his own phone while his peripheral vision stayed locked on both targets. The woman started walking again, this time angling toward a service corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. The man in the gray hoodie peeled away from the vending machine, moving in the opposite direction but maintaining a parallel path. They were coordinating, splitting up to avoid suspicion, but staying within visual range of each other. Michael's mind raced through the logistics. 2 handlers, 3 children. A service corridor. This wasn't random. This was an extraction point, somewhere away from cameras, away from crowds, where a vehicle could pull up and disappear within seconds. He was running out of time. The woman stopped abruptly. Michael froze, his body shielded by a support beam. She crouched down in front of the little girl, adjusting the child's jacket with rough, impatient movements. The girl stood perfectly still, her arms limp at her sides, her eyes fixed on the floor. That's when Michael saw it. As the woman tugged the girl's sleeve down, something metallic glinted in the harsh fluorescent light. A small blade, no longer than 4 inches, tucked inside a fabric sheath sewn into the woman's sleeve. The kind of weapon designed to be concealed, easy to access, and devastating at close range. Michael's blood went cold. This wasn't just a trafficking operation. This was a well-organized, well-funded network, the kind that planned for resistance, the kind that eliminated problems before they became threats. These people weren't amateurs running scared kids across borders in the back of vans. They were professionals. And professionals were always more dangerous. The woman stood, her hand briefly resting on the little girl's shoulder. Not affectionately, but possessively, the way someone might touch a piece of luggage to make sure it was still there. Then she resumed walking, heading toward the service corridor's entrance. Michael's instincts screamed. If she got those kids through that door, they were gone. Once they were inside, off the main floor, away from witnesses, anything could happen. A vehicle could be waiting, a secondary team, a kill room where loose ends got tied up permanently. He couldn't let that happen, but he also couldn't move recklessly. There were civilians everywhere, travelers waiting for trains, station workers pushing carts, families clustered near ticket counters. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and this entire situation could turn into a bloodbath. Michael pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. He typed a message to Victor. Eyes on me. Lower platform, service corridor near gate 7. Woman, dark coat, 3 kids. Second target, gray hoodie, male, 20s. No weapons unless I say. Stay invisible. The reply came almost instantly. In position. Eyes on you? Michael exhaled slowly. Victor was good. Former military, former enforcer, the kind of man who could ghost through a crowd and materialize exactly where you needed him. If things went sideways, Victor would handle it. But Michael didn't want things to go sideways. He watched as the woman reached the service corridor entrance. The door was heavy steel, marked with faded warnings about restricted access. She didn't hesitate. Her hand moved to the handle, and she pushed it open with practiced ease. The children filed through one by one, the oldest boy first, then the little girl, then the youngest boy. Obedient, terrified, silent. Michael's chest tightened. He thought of Marlon, sitting in that wheelchair upstairs, trembling and broken. He thought of the bruises on the boy's wrists, the damage to his hands and spine. This woman, or people like her, had done that. Had taken a child, used him, discarded him when he became too much trouble. And now she was doing it again. The woman glanced back one last time, her eyes sweeping the corridor. Michael stood perfectly still, his body angled away, his phone raised as if he were reading something important. Just another traveler. Just another face. Her gaze passed over him without recognition. Then she stepped through the door, and it swung shut behind her with a heavy metallic thud. Michael moved immediately. He crossed the distance in seconds, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. The man in the gray hoodie was still visible, now standing near a stairwell on the opposite side of the terminal. He hadn't followed the woman. He was watching the perimeter, playing lookout. Michael filed that information away. 2 handlers, one inside with the cargo, one outside keeping watch. Standard procedure for coordinated extraction. He reached the service corridor door and tested the handle, unlocked. Sloppy. Or intentional. A quick exit route if things went wrong. Michael's hand hovered over the door. Every instinct told him to go through, to finish this now. But charging in blind was how you got dead. He needed to know what was on the other side. How many people? What kind of setup? Whether the children were still mobile or had been secured. He pulled out his phone and sent another message to Victor. Need eyes inside. Service door, gate 7. Woman and 3 kids. I'm going in. Cover the lookout. Gray hoodie, stairwell. East side. Victor's response was immediate. Copy. On him. Michael pocketed the phone and placed his hand flat against the door. He closed his eyes, listening. On the other side, he could hear faint sounds, footsteps, the scrape of something heavy being moved, a muffled voice giving instructions. He opened his eyes. This was it. The moment where everything changed. Where he stopped being a man trying to walk away from his past and became exactly what he'd always been. A predator, hunting another predator. But this time, he wasn't doing it for money, or power, or survival. This time, he was doing it because a paralyzed boy had signaled for help, and Michael Herman, despite everything he'd done, everything he'd destroyed, still had enough humanity left to answer. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The corridor beyond was narrow and dimly lit, lined with electrical panels and storage cages. 20 meters ahead, the woman stood beside a service elevator, her phone pressed to her ear. The children were huddled together near the wall, their small frames pressed close, their eyes wide with terror. Michael moved forward, his footsteps deliberate now. Loud enough to be heard. The woman turned, her phone still at her ear. For a split second, her expression remained neutral. Just another station worker, another stranger in the hallway. Then recognition flickered across her face. Not recognition of Michael specifically, but recognition of what he was. A threat. Her hand moved toward her sleeve. Michael smiled. Cold, predatory, the smile of a man who had done this dance 100 times before. I wouldn't, he said quietly, his voice echoing in the narrow space. The woman froze, her fingers inches from the concealed blade. Her eyes darted to the elevator, calculating distance, escape routes, options. Michael took another step forward. Those kids, he said, his tone conversational, almost friendly. They're not going anywhere. The woman's jaw tightened. Her hand dropped slowly from her sleeve, but her body remained coiled, ready to spring. I don't know who you think you are, she said, her accent faint but present. Eastern European, maybe Russian. But you're making a mistake. Michael's smile widened. Story of my life. Behind him, the service door opened. Victor stepped through, his presence filling the narrow corridor. 6'4", 240 pounds of controlled violence. He said nothing, just positioned himself between Michael and the exit, cutting off the woman's escape route. The woman's eyes widened. She understood immediately. She was trapped. Here's how this works, Michael said, his voice still calm, still conversational. You're going to step away from those kids. You're going to put your hands where I can see them. And you're going to tell me who else is involved. The woman's hand twitched. Or, Michael continued, his tone darkening. I let my friend here handle it, and trust me, you don't want that. For a long moment, the corridor was silent except for the hum of electrical panels and the distant rumble of trains overhead. Then, slowly, the woman raised her hands. The woman's hands hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then her eyes shifted, not to Michael, not to Victor, but past them, toward the service door they'd entered through. Michael saw it, the flicker of calculation, the absence of fear. She wasn't surrendering, she was stalling. Move away from the kids, Michael said, his voice harder now. Now. But the woman didn't move. Instead, Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Cold, knowing, almost amused. "You should have stayed upstairs, Mr. Herman." Michael's blood turned to ice. She knew his name. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't random. This wasn't a trafficking operation that he'd stumbled into by accident. They'd been waiting, watching. The woman, the man in the gray hoodie, the positioning near the service corridor. It was all deliberate. They knew he was here. Behind him, Victor tensed. Michael could feel the shift in the air, the sudden understanding that they'd walked into something far more complex than a simple extraction. "Victor," Michael said quietly, not taking his eyes off the woman. "We need to leave. Now." But before Victor could respond, the service door burst open. 2 men rushed through, both young, both moving with the trained efficiency of people who'd done this before. One wore a black leather jacket, the other a dark windbreaker. Neither carried visible weapons, but Michael didn't need to see metal to know they were armed. They positioned themselves on either side of Victor, cutting off the exit. Michael's mind raced. 4 hostiles, 1 narrow corridor, 3 children in the crossfire. Victor was good, but even he couldn't handle 4 trained operators in close quarters without collateral damage. "I told you," the woman said, lowering her hands slowly. Her confidence had returned, settling over her like armor. "You made a mistake." The man in the gray hoodie appeared in the doorway behind the other 2, his hands still in his pockets, his expression calm. He looked at Michael with the detached curiosity of someone observing an interesting specimen. "Michael Herman," he said, his accent thick. "Russian?" "Definitely Russian." "The ghost who won't die. They said you were retiring, going soft, leaving the life." Michael said nothing. His eyes moved between the 4 men, calculating angles, distances, weaknesses. The man in the leather jacket favored his right side, old injury, probably a knife wound that never healed properly. The one in the windbreaker kept shifting his weight, nervous, less experienced. "Who sent you?" Michael asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The man in the gray hoodie smiled. "Does it matter? You walked into our operation. You threatened our asset. What did you think would happen?" "Asset," Michael repeated, his jaw tightening. "You mean the children?" "Cargo," the woman corrected coldly. "And very expensive cargo. Cargo that you've just made significantly more difficult to move." Michael's hands curled into fists. Behind him, he could hear Victor's breathing. Slow, controlled, ready. They'd been in worse situations. Back alleys in Prague, warehouses in Istanbul, rooftops in Berlin. They'd survived them all. But this felt different. This felt planned. "They're not afraid of you," Michael said quietly, more to himself than to Victor. "They're prepared for you." The man in the gray hoodie's smile widened. "Word travels fast in our world, Mr. Herman. When a legendary enforcer shows up at a station where we're conducting business, we pay attention. When he starts following our people, we adapt." Michael's mind clicked through the timeline. He'd been watching the woman for less than 10 minutes, which meant they'd spotted him almost immediately, which meant they had more than just 4 people here. They had surveillance, lookouts, a network. This wasn't a trafficking operation. This was a trap, and he'd walked straight into it. "So what now?" Michael asked, buying time. His hand moved subtly toward his belt, where he'd tucked a small folding knife that morning. Old habit, muscle memory. "You kill me in a service corridor? In a train station full of witnesses?" "No witnesses down here," the man in the gray hoodie said. "And as for killing you," he shrugged, "that depends on how cooperative you are." The 4 men began moving forward, closing the distance slowly, deliberately. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They had position, numbers, and a corridor with nowhere to run. The children pressed themselves against the wall, trembling. The little girl's eyes found Michael's, wide, terrified, pleading. Michael's jaw tightened. He'd walked into this to save them. He wasn't leaving without them. "Victor," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations, 1,000 battles fought side by side. "Copy," Victor replied, his tone calm. "Ready." The man in the gray hoodie sighed. "Unfortunate. We were hoping you'd be reasonable." Michael's hand closed around the knife. "Reasonable," he said, his voice dropping to something dark and dangerous. "Was never really my style." Then everything exploded into violence. The man in the leather jacket moved first. He came in fast, throwing a heavy right hook aimed at Michael's jaw, the kind of punch designed to end fights before they started. But Michael had seen it coming from the moment the man shifted his weight. He ducked under the swing, his body moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd survived hundreds of these moments. His fist drove upward into the man's solar plexus, a short, brutal strike that collapsed the man's diaphragm and sent all the air rushing from his lungs. The attacker's eyes bulged. His mouth opened in a silent gasp. Michael didn't give him time to recover. His elbow snapped around, connecting with the man's temple with a sickening crack. The attacker dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his body crumpling to the floor in a boneless heap. 2 seconds, maybe less. The man in the windbreaker hesitated for half a heartbeat, just long enough to register that his partner was down. That hesitation cost him everything. He rushed forward, reaching inside his jacket for whatever weapon he'd concealed there. His hand closed around something metallic. A gun? A knife? It didn't matter. Michael was already moving. He caught the man's wrist as the weapon cleared the jacket. A compact pistol, black polymer grip, suppressor already attached. Michael twisted hard, his other hand driving into the man's elbow joint. Bone met cartilage at the wrong angle. The man screamed. The gun clattered to the concrete floor. Michael swept the man's legs, sending him crashing backward. His head bounced off the metal edge of a storage cage with a hollow thunk, and he went still. 4 seconds total. 2 men down. But Victor was already engaged with the other 2. The man in the gray hoodie had produced a knife. Long, serrated, military grade. He came at Victor low and fast, trying to gut him. Victor sidestepped, grabbed the man's knife hand and slammed it against the concrete wall. Once, twice. The blade fell. The 4th man, the one who'd come through the door last, pulled a telescoping baton and swung it at Victor's head. Victor caught it mid-swing, his massive hand wrapping around the metal like a vice. He yanked hard, pulling the man off balance, then drove his forehead into the attacker's nose. Blood exploded across both their faces. The corridor erupted into chaos. The woman screamed, not in fear, but in rage. She grabbed the children, shoving them toward the service door. "Move! Now!" Her hand dove into her sleeve, retrieving the small blade Michael had spotted earlier. The children stumbled forward, terrified and confused. The oldest boy tripped, sprawling across the floor. The woman didn't stop. She grabbed the little girl's arm and yanked her through the doorway. "Michael!" Victor shouted, his voice strained as he grappled with the man in the gray hoodie, who'd recovered his knife and was trying to drive it into Victor's ribs. Michael started toward them, but movement in his peripheral vision stopped him. The woman was escaping, taking the children through the service door, back toward the main terminal. He couldn't let that happen. But Victor? "Go!" Victor roared, slamming the gray-hooded man against the wall. I've got this! Go! Michael didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the service door, his boots pounding against concrete. Behind him, he could hear Victor's fight continuing. Grunts, impacts, the wet sound of fists meeting flesh. Michael burst through the door and back into the lower terminal. The woman was already 20 meters ahead, dragging the little girl by her wrist. The two boys ran ahead of her, their small legs churning. A few travelers had stopped to stare, sensing something wrong but not yet understanding what they were witnessing. Michael ran, his longer stride eating up the distance. The woman glanced back, her eyes widening as she saw him coming. She shoved the little girl forward and broke into a full sprint, heading toward a side exit marked with a green emergency sign. She was going to get away. The children were going to disappear. And then, cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal like a blade through silk, a voice screamed. Not just any voice, a child's voice, hoarse, cracking, raw from disuse. Left! She's going left! Michael's head snapped toward the sound. Marlon. The boy sat in his wheelchair at the top of the stairs leading to the lower platform, his small body trembling with the effort of producing that scream. His hand pointed toward the side exit, shaking violently. Left! He screamed again, tears streaming down his face. She's going left! People were staring now. Phones were coming out. Someone shouted for security. But Michael heard only one thing, that desperate, broken voice giving him direction. The woman had veered right, trying to use the crowd as cover. But Marlon had seen her, had tracked her movement from above. Michael adjusted his angle instantly, cutting left around a cluster of travelers. He vaulted over a row of benches, his body airborne for a split second before he landed running. The woman was 15 meters from the exit, 10 meters, 5. Her hand reached for the door handle. Michael's hand closed around her shoulder like a vice. He yanked her backward, spinning her away from the exit. She stumbled, the little girl's wrist slipping from her grasp. The woman's hand flashed upward, the small blade glinting under fluorescent lights. Michael caught her wrist inches from his throat. His other hand drove into her solar plexus. The same strike he'd used on the first attacker. The woman folded, gasping, the knife tumbling from her fingers. He swept her legs. She went down hard, her head cracking against the marble floor. She didn't get up. The terminal was screaming now. People running, scattering, pulling children away. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Michael knelt beside the woman's still form and pulled her coat open. Documents spilled out. Passports, photos, phones. Cash bundled in rubber bands. Everything Marlon had tried to warn him about. Michael looked up toward the stairs. Marlon was still there, slumped in his wheelchair, his chest heaving, his face wet with tears. Their eyes met across the chaos. The boy had found his voice, and Michael had heard it. The woman's handbag hit the marble floor and exploded open, its contents scattering across the polished stone like evidence at a crime scene. Passports, dozens of them. Different colors, different countries, all with photos of children who looked nothing like the names printed inside. Michael knelt down, his knee pressed against the woman's back to keep her pinned, and grabbed the nearest one. A Polish passport. The photo showed a blonde girl, maybe 8 years old. The name read Katarzyna Nowak, but the lamination was too perfect, the ink too fresh. Forged. His hand moved to the next item. A burner phone. Its screen cracked but still lit. Text messages in Cyrillic, coordinates, times, code words that meant nothing to civilians but everything to people in the trade. Then the photos. Michael's stomach turned. Dozens of them, printed on cheap photo paper, each showing a different child. Some were candid shots taken from a distance. Kids playing in parks, walking home from school, sitting in cafes with their families. Others were more deliberate, closer, as if someone had been watching for weeks. Each photo had a number written in the corner, an inventory system. His hand closed around a folded piece of paper. He opened it. A list. 23 names. Ages ranging from 4 to 12. Addresses, school schedules, family details. 3 of the names had been crossed out in red ink. Completed transactions. "Don't move!" a voice shouted behind him. Michael didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this. He slowly raised one hand, keeping the other pressed against the woman's back. "She's a trafficker," he said calmly, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Check the bag. Check her pockets." Footsteps approached rapidly, multiple officers, their boots echoing across the marble. Michael felt a hand grab his shoulder, pulling him back. He released the woman and raised both hands, letting them haul him to his feet. 3 police officers surrounded the woman, who was groaning now, her eyes fluttering open. One officer picked up the bag, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock as he looked inside. "Christ," he muttered. "Radio for backup, and get CID down here. Now." Within minutes, the terminal was swarming with police. The lower platform was cordoned off. The children, all 3 of them, were wrapped in emergency blankets and escorted to a quiet corner by social workers who'd arrived with the second wave of responders. Michael stood against a support column, hands cuffed behind his back, watching the controlled chaos unfold. 2 officers guarded him, but neither spoke. They'd seen the evidence. They knew who the real criminal was. A detective approached, late 40s, gray suit, tired eyes that had seen too much. He studied Michael for a long moment, then glanced at the woman being loaded onto a stretcher, her wrists zip-tied to the rails. "Michael Herman," the detective said. It wasn't a question. Michael said nothing. The detective pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. Nadia Velar. Interpol's had a red notice on her for 18 months. Wanted in Poland, Germany, and France for human trafficking, kidnapping, and child exploitation. He looked up. "We've been chasing her for over a year, and you just handed her to us." Michael's jaw tightened. "The kids?" "Safe," the detective said. "Thanks to you." He paused. "And thanks to the boy upstairs." "Marlon," Michael said quietly. The detective nodded. "Marlon Brown, 6 years old, reported missing 9 months ago from Budapest. Family thought he was dead." He swiped the tablet screen, then turned it toward Michael. A case file. Photos of a smiling, healthy boy with bright eyes and sturdy legs. Then photos from 3 months ago. Hospital records, a child's broken body, spine fractured in 2 places, nerve damage classified as permanent. "He was one of Nadia's acquisitions," the detective continued, his voice flat, clinical. "But he fought back during transport, tried to escape from a moving vehicle. He fell or was pushed. We're not sure which. By the time they found him, the damage was done. Paralyzed from the waist down. Damaged vocal cords from screaming." Michael's hands curled into fists behind his back. "They dumped him at a hospital in Vienna," the detective said. "Anonymous drop-off, no ID, no paperwork. It took us 2 months just to figure out who he was. His family couldn't afford to bring him home, so he's been in state care ever since." "He recognized her," Michael said, his voice rough. The detective nodded. "The moment he saw her face, and he tried to warn someone, anyone." He looked toward the stairs, where Marlon sat surrounded by paramedics checking his vitals. "Most people wouldn't have noticed, but you did." Michael followed his gaze. Marlon was staring back at him, his small face pale but his eyes steady. Alive. Present. "He found his voice today," the detective said quietly. "First time he screamed in months, according to his caretakers, and he used it to help you save 3 more kids from ending up like him." The detective tapped his tablet, closing the file. "We're going to need your statement, Mr. Herman, all of it, and you're going to need to explain why a known criminal was playing hero in a train station." Michael's expression didn't change. "I saw something wrong. I stopped it." The detective studied him for a long moment, then gestured to one of the officers. "Uncuff him." "Sir?" the officer asked, confused. "Uncuff him," the detective repeated. "He's not under arrest. He's a witness." The officer hesitated, then pulled out his keys and released Michael's wrists. Michael rubbed his arms, his eyes still on Marlon. "The boy," Michael said. "What happens to him now?" The detective sighed. "Same as before. State care until his family can arrange transport. Could be weeks, could be months." Michael nodded slowly, a plan already forming. Not all debts could be paid with money, but some could be paid with protection. The interrogation room was small, concrete-walled, with a single metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A camera blinked red in the corner. The detective sat across from Michael, a digital recorder placed between them, its light steady and accusatory. "For the record," the detective said, "this is Detective Inspector Klaus Weber. The date is—" "I know their network," Michael interrupted. Weber stopped mid-sentence. His hand hovered over the recorder. "What?" "Nadia Villar's network," Michael said, his voice flat, matter of fact. "I know it. Routes, contacts, warehouses, dead drops. I know where they move product, who they pay off, and how they launder the money." Weber leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "And why would you know that, Mr. Herman?" Michael met his gaze without flinching. "Because our worlds intersect. The underworld isn't separate territories anymore, Detective. It's a web. Trafficking, drugs, weapons, money, it all touches. And people talk. People like you. People like me," Michael confirmed. Weber studied him for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a notebook. He clicked his pen. "I'm listening." Michael began talking. He gave them everything. Names first. Handlers, transporters, buyers. Men and women he'd seen at meetings in Prague, Berlin, Istanbul. People who operated in the shadows, whose faces never appeared in databases, but whose presence was felt across borders. Then locations. A warehouse in Hamburg's industrial district where children were held in shipping containers before being moved. A safe house in Lyon disguised as a boarding school. A processing center in Bucharest where documents were forged and identities erased. He described the financial structure. Shell companies registered in Cyprus and Panama. Cryptocurrency wallets used to transfer payments. Corrupt officials in 3 countries who looked the other way for the right price. Weber's pen moved frantically across the notebook, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief to something that looked almost like hope. "How do you know all this?" Weber asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael's jaw tightened. "Because I've done business with some of them. Not this business, never children, but our paths crossed. And I pay attention." "You realize what you're doing," Weber said carefully. "You're burning bridges. Every name you give me, every location, you're putting a target on your back. The underworld doesn't forgive informants." "I know." "Then why?" Michael was silent for a long moment. His tattooed hands rested flat on the metal table, scarred knuckles still swollen from the fight in the corridor. He thought of Marlon's trembling hand tapping out that desperate signal, the little girl's terrified eyes, the list of 23 names in Nadia's bag. "Because I've done terrible things," he said quietly. "Things I can't take back. Things that keep me awake at night." He looked up, meeting Weber's eyes. "But this? Stopping this? This is something I can do. Maybe the only good thing I'll ever do." Weber set his pen down. "You're throwing away your entire life." Michael's expression didn't change. "I threw it away years ago, Detective. I'm just cleaning up the mess." Weber exhaled slowly, then picked up his pen again. "All right, Mr. Herman, let's start with Hamburg. Tell me everything." And Michael did. For 3 hours, he dismantled Nadia Velar's network piece by piece, burning every bridge, severing every connection, turning his back on a world that had defined him for 20 years. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but because a paralyzed boy had asked for help. And for once in his life, Michael Herman chose to answer. The Hamburg warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial port, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and abandoned cranes that loomed like skeletal giants against the night sky. At 0300 hours, the building was dark, except for a single light burning in a second-floor window. Detective Weber crouched behind an unmarked van, his tactical vest tight across his chest, radio pressed to his ear. Around him, 20 officers from Germany's Federal Criminal Police moved into position, silent shadows spreading through the darkness. "All units, hold," Weber whispered into his radio. "Wait for my signal." What Weber didn't know was that he wasn't alone. On the opposite side of the warehouse, behind a stack of rotting pallets, Victor knelt in the darkness. Beside him, 3 of Michael's men, Dmitri, Alexei, and Kael, checked their weapons with practiced efficiency. No police issue sidearms, no less lethal options. These were men who'd survived wars in places that didn't make the news. "Remember," Victor said quietly, his voice barely audible. "We're ghosts. In and out. No one sees us. No one knows we were here." "Understood," Dmitri replied, his scarred face grim. They'd received the call 6 hours earlier. Michael's voice on an encrypted line, flat and direct. "Hamburg, Warehouse 7, Dock District. Children inside. Police are hitting it at 0300. Be there. Help them. Don't get caught. No explanation. No justification. Just an order from a man they'd followed into hell more times than they could count." Weber's voice crackled through the night. "All units, breach. Breach. Breach!" The warehouse doors exploded inward. Flashbangs detonated with blinding white light and concussive thunder. Officers poured through the entrance, their rifles raised, voices shouting commands in German. Inside, chaos erupted. The traffickers had been waiting. 6 men with automatic weapons opened fire from elevated positions, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Bullets tore through the air, punching holes in walls and ricocheting off metal beams. An officer went down, clutching his shoulder. Another dove behind a concrete pillar, returning fire. Weber's voice roared over the radio. "Suppressing fire! Get those shooters down!" On the opposite side of the warehouse, Victor's team entered through a service door. Silent, invisible. They moved like predators through the shadows, their weapons raised. A trafficker appeared on a catwalk above, his rifle sweeping toward the police below. Victor's suppressed pistol coughed twice. The man crumpled without a sound. Alexei pointed toward a cluster of shipping crates in the far corner. "There." They moved toward the crates, covering each other with military precision. Dmitri reached the first container and yanked the door open. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were 7 children, terrified, filthy, some crying silently, others too traumatized to make a sound. "It's okay," Dmitri whispered in broken English. "Police here. You safe now." Behind them, the firefight intensified. A trafficker with a shotgun emerged from a stairwell, firing wildly. Kael took a round to his vest, the impact spinning him sideways. He went down hard, gasping. Victor turned and fired. 3 shots, center mass. The trafficker collapsed. "Kael!" Alexei moved to his fallen comrade, checking for wounds. Blood seeped through Kael's jacket, dark and spreading. "He's hit bad. Get him out," Victor ordered. "Use the service exit, now!" Alexei and Dmitri dragged Kael toward the door, the wounded man's boots scraping across concrete. Victor stayed behind, covering their retreat, his eyes scanning for threats. More police poured into the warehouse. Weber's tactical team overwhelmed the remaining traffickers with coordinated fire. One by one, the shooters fell, dead, wounded, or surrendering with raised hands. Victor moved back toward the shipping crates, toward the children. He knelt down, his massive frame blocking the doorway, shielding them from the violence beyond. "Stay here," he said gently. "Police coming." "You safe?" Then he melted into the shadows and disappeared. By 30:30, the warehouse was secure. Weber stood in the center of the space, breathing hard, his weapon lowered. Around him, officers processed the scene, zip-tying suspects, marking evidence, calling for ambulances. And in the far corner, surrounded by social workers and paramedics, 7 children were being led towards safety. Weber's radio crackled. "Inspector, we found more. 2nd floor, another 12 children. Locked cages, some of them." The voice trailed off. Weber closed his eyes. 19 children, 19 lives saved. He looked around the warehouse, his trained eyes catching details. Bullet holes in walls at angles that didn't match police firing positions. A dead trafficker on the catwalk with wounds too precise, too professional. A service door left slightly ajar. Someone else had been here, but Weber was too tired to care. He keyed his radio. "All units, secure the perimeter. Get medical for the children. And someone contact Michael Herman. Tell him we got them all." In a safe house across the city, Michael's phone buzzed. He read the message, then set the phone down. Kael was dead. Died during extraction, but 19 children were alive. Michael stared at the wall, his expression unreadable. One right thing. That's all he'd wanted, even if it cost everything. The station was different in daylight, softer. The harsh fluorescent lights that had illuminated violence and fear now gave way to natural sun streaming through high-arched windows. The crowd flowed with its usual rhythm. Travelers checking departure boards, families saying goodbye. Businessmen rushing toward platforms with coffee cups in hand. Life had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But near the same row of benches where it had all begun, Marlon Brown sat in his wheelchair, still as stone, just breathing. He wore clean clothes now, a donated jacket too big for his small frame, sleeves rolled up to reveal the fading bruises on his wrists. His hair had been washed, combed back from his pale face. A social worker had brought him here this morning, explaining that they needed to retrace his steps for the investigation, that it would help with his recovery. But Marlon had asked to stay a little longer. He didn't know why. He just knew he wasn't ready to leave yet. His eyes tracked the movement of passengers the same way they had the day before, watching, searching, looking for patterns in the chaos. It was a habit now, burned into him by months of survival, of learning to read danger before it reached him. But today, he was just watching people live their ordinary lives. A mother laughed as her toddler chased a rolling suitcase. An elderly couple held hands, moving slowly toward their platform. A teenager scrolled through her phone, oblivious to the world around her. Normal? Safe? Boring? Marlon's chest tightened. He wondered if he'd ever feel normal again. If his legs would ever work. If his voice would ever sound like it used to, instead of this broken, stuttering thing that barely worked. If he'd ever stop being afraid. Then he saw him. Michael Herman emerged from the crowd like a shadow made solid, dressed in black, his tattooed arms visible beneath rolled sleeves, his presence still commanding despite his deliberate effort to blend in. People instinctively gave him space, their eyes skipping over him the way prey avoids predators. But his eyes found Marlon immediately. He walked across the terminal with purposeful strides, his boots silent on the marble floor. When he reached the wheelchair, he stopped and stood there for a moment, just looking down at the small boy who'd started everything. Then, slowly, Michael knelt. He brought himself down to Marlon's level, his tattooed hands resting on his knees, the same posture he'd taken the day before, when a silent signal had changed both their lives. Up close, Marlon could see the details. Fresh bruises along Michael's jaw, a cut above his eyebrow, butterfly-stitched and healing. The exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that went deeper than lack of sleep. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The station noise hummed around them, announcements, footsteps, distant conversations. But in that small space between them, there was only silence. Then Marlon's voice broke through, barely above a whisper. "Why, did you help?" The words came out broken, stuttered, each syllable a struggle. But they were real. They were his. Michael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been pain, or regret, or something too complex to name. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Kid," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Even devils get one last chance to do the right thing." Marlon stared at him, his young mind trying to process the weight behind those words. Are you a devil?" Michael's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yeah, I am." "But you saved me." "Doesn't change what I am," Michael said. "Just changes what I did. This one time." Marlon's small hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. The other kids?" "Safe," Michael replied. "All of them, 19 children from the warehouse. The 3 from yesterday, all safe. Because you warned me." Tears welled in Marlon's eyes. "I was scared. I know. But I had to try." Michael nodded slowly. "That's the bravest thing anyone can do, kid. Be scared and try anyway." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, metallic. A medallion, roughly the size of a coin, suspended on a thin black cord. The metal was old, worn smooth by years of handling. On one side was an emblem, a wolf's head, etched in silver, its eyes seeming to gleam even in the diffused light. It was the symbol of Michael's syndicate, a mark that carried weight in the underworld. Protection, warning, power. Michael placed the medallion in Marlon's small palm, closing the boy's fingers around it gently. "If anyone comes after you," Michael said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Show them this. It means you're under my protection now. It means anyone who touches you answers to me. Marlon's fingers trembled around the medallion. But you're leaving. I am. Where will you go? Michael stood slowly, his knees cracking slightly. He looked out across the terminal, toward the platforms beyond, toward trains that could take him anywhere. Somewhere far from here, he said. Somewhere they can't find me. Not for a while, anyway. Because you helped? Because I burned every bridge I had left to help, Michael corrected. He looked back down at Marlon. But it was worth it. Marlon's voice cracked. Will I see you again? Michael's expression softened. Just for a moment, just enough for Marlon to see the human beneath the monster. Maybe, kid. Maybe not. But you'll be okay. You're stronger than you think. He reached out and rested his hand briefly on Marlon's shoulder, a gesture that was surprisingly gentle for a man who'd spent his life dealing in violence. You found your voice yesterday, Michael said. Don't lose it again. The world needs to hear what you have to say. Then he withdrew his hand and straightened. Goodbye, Marlon Brown. Goodbye, Michael Herman. Michael turned and walked away, his black-clad figure moving through the crowd with the same quiet confidence as before. People parted for him instinctively, their eyes sliding away, their minds already forgetting his face. Marlon watched him go, his small hand clutched tightly around the medallion. He watched until Michael reached the far end of the terminal, until he stepped through the archway toward the platforms, until he disappeared completely into the flow of ordinary people living ordinary lives. And then he was gone. Marlon sat there in his wheelchair, the medallion warm against his palm, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel afraid. The social worker returned a few minutes later, her expression gentle and patient. Ready to go, Marlon? Marlon nodded slowly. He tucked the medallion inside his jacket, against his heart, where no one could see it. Yes, he said, his voice still broken but stronger than before. I'm ready. As they wheeled him toward the exit, Marlon looked back one last time at the station, at the place where his nightmare had almost continued, where a dangerous man had chosen to become something else, even if just for a moment. Sometimes heroes don't wear badges or halos. Sometimes they're men with tattoos, scars, and blood on their hands, men who've done terrible things, who carry the weight of sins too heavy to ever fully wash away. But sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, in a crowded place where faces blur and footsteps echo, those men see something wrong, and they choose to fix it, not for redemption, not for glory, not because they believe they deserve forgiveness, but because a child who couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't fight, found a way to scream for help, and someone, against all odds, heard him.